APUSH Chapter 1, Part 2. I believe I left off talking about nation-states. So now we're on to early explorations. Basically, all of the changes I talked about last video basically helped Christopher and have the motivation and ability to go out and explore. So Christopher Columbus, he tried to get funding for his plan to go west, and then yay, Isabella and Ferdinand said yes. Wait, that low-key rhymed. Anyway, 1492 sailed the ocean blue. He ended up landing in the Bahamas though, so not India. But it was still kind of excess because he did land somewhere, but then there wasn't a lot of gold or spice or China or India. So also people kind of thought he was a failure. And today he has modern day critics as well, but people do generally agree that he was important and did change history because he brought this permanent interaction across the globe. So exchanges. You have the Columbian one. So the Columbian Exchange. And this was an exchange of plants, animals, and germs between the New World and the Old World. New World referring to the Americas, Old World referring to Afro-Eurasia. So beans, corns, sweet and white potatoes, tomatoes, tobacco, all were new things to Europe from the Americas. And then sugar cane, bluegrasses, pigs, horses, the wheel, iron implements, guns, those things came to the Americas from Europe. And then obviously disease. Disease is a huge one because smallpox and measles came from Europe to the Americas and killed millions. Now, how are they gonna divide the Americas? Well, we have an example here. Spain and Portugal were the first to claim territories in South America, and they were getting into a little fight about whose land was whose. So then the Pope settled it, and he decided and drew the line of demarcation. So Spain got the west of that, and Portugal got the east. But then that line shifted in 1494 with the Treaty of Tordesillas, giving Portugal a little more land because it shifted the line west. But Treaty of Tordesillas, 1494, shifted that line. Basically, it's why they speak Portuguese in Brazil, because Portugal claimed Brazil. Then Spanish exploration and conquest. So the conquistadores, basically conquerors, conquered land for Spain. Explorers did as well. So you might recall Hernan Cortez, who conquested the Aztecs in Mexico, or Francisco Pizarro, who conquested the Incas in Peru from AP World. But these conquistadors would send back gold and silver to Spain so that Spain got super rich and powerful, which then meant other nations wanted to get gold and power. So then they went to the Americas. Also, I would want to note this idea of mercantilism. Basically, it's this economic thing that means that all these countries want to have more wealth in silver and gold to have better trade. So I think you get more of that next chapter. There was also the encomienda system that was established. So basically, the king of Spain would give conquistadors grants of lands that included the natives who lived on that land, and then the natives would have to work for the conquistadors in exchange for care and protection, but it was really just a form of forced labor. And the Native Americans were mistreated and abused, and a lot of Native Americans died because of the disease like smallpox and measles that they did not have any sort of immunity to. And so they also died from brutality. And so then enslaved people from West Africa were brought over with the asiento system. And the asiento system was basically you had to pay a tax to the king on each slave that was imported to the Americas. Moving on to English claims, we have John Cabot, I think. Rolling with that. He was the first to voyage for England to get America territory. But then there wasn't really any follow-up to that because there was stuff going on in England because Henry VIII was breaking up with the Roman Catholic Church, and then Queen Elizabeth I was challenging Spanish shipping in the oceans, and there was kind of other stuff going on that was kind of more immediate for them. But then there was this other settlement that was attempted on Roanoke Island by Sir Walter Raleigh, but that failed. They kind of just disappeared, and it's kind of a huge mystery. The only thing that was left was this tree with the word Croatoan on it. Anyway, moving on, French claims. Giovanni da Verrazzano was the first person to kind of go out and show interest for Spain in exploration. But then the bolded guy that you should probably know is Jacques Cartier, I don't know, who explored the St. Lawrence River and territorialized America for France. Similarly to the English, they were kind of slow to capitalize on this because they were also getting into a few messes around European wars, and they also had some internal religious conflict between the Roman Catholics and the Huguenots, which were French Protestants. But their first permanent settlements were done by Samuel de Champlain in Quebec, which you might have heard of, on the St. Lawrence River, and he was, quote, the father of New France. Also, other French people explored the Mississippi River at, the top and, over by Louisiana. Moving on to Dutch claims, so Henry Hudson was hired to go to Asia through North America by the Netherlands, but he ended up on the Hudson River, which ended up kind of establishing New Amsterdam and later on New York, and the Dutch West India Company was given the right to control the region. So Spanish settlements in North America developed slower than the ones in the South America because the American Indians had a stronger opposition in North America, and also there were limited mineral resources there. But in Florida, the Spanish set up a permanent settlement after a bunch of failed attempts in St. Augustine. In New Mexico, they established Santa Fe as a capital. However, then there was the Pueblo Revolt in 1680 because they were trying to very harshly Christianize the Native Americans, the Pueblos, Native Americans who were living there. And so they revolted in 1680 and kicked the Spanish out. But then in 1692, the Spanish ended up coming back. There were settlements in Texas that grew around the early 1700s, and they had to resist the French trying to explore the lower part of the Mississippi River because they were occupying Texas at the time, the Spanish. Then in California, there was this permanent settlement in San Diego in 1769, then San Francisco in 1776, and then in 1784, there was kind of missions and settlements along the Californian coast. Now, as for European treatment of Native Americans, most Europeans thought that Native Americans were inferior and they would exploit them, using them for economic gain, to trying to get them to convert to Christianity, or to trying to use them as military allies. As for Spanish policy, the Aztecs and Incas were kind of highly organized, so even after lots of disease and deaths due to those diseases, those that remained in the Aztecs and Incas were forced into labor, and then even more natives died while in this forced labor. But then the caste system developed. The book doesn't actually call it the caste system, but when it mentions that hierarchy, that's what it is. So you had Peninsulares, which were born in Spain, Creoles, who were fully Spanish but born in the Americas, Mestizos, who were part Spanish, part Native American, and mulattoes, which were part Spanish, part African. And this kind of occurred due to the intermarrying between the Spanish, Africans, and Native Americans. And so that racial hierarchy developed. And this was because not a lot of Spanish families came over. Anyways, Bartolomé de las Casas, he was a Spanish priest who, though had previously owned land and slaves and fought against Indians, ended up advocating for Indians, and he persuaded the king to enact the new laws of 1542. And these ended Indian slavery, forced labor, and the encomienda system, but then more conservative Spaniards pushed and were successful in repealing parts of these new laws. Then there ended up being the Valladolid debate, which is this debate over the role of Native Americans in the Spanish colonies. And it wasn't a debate, but it was kind of Las Casas and this dude named Juan Tines de Sepulveda, who were kind of taking turns speaking and arguing in this college town. So Sepulveda argued that Native Americans were inferior, and there ended up being no clear winner, but Las Casas, although being unsuccessful in the implementation of his ideas, at least laid out the argument for justice for Native Americans. Now, English policy, so they settled in areas without large Native American empires, and they came with families, so there were no marriages with Native Americans. Basically, they initially coexisted kind of peacefully, traded, ideas were exchanged. Native Americans showed them how to grow corn and hunt in forests and trade furs for manufactured goods, like weapons, iron, tools. But then there was kind of warfare and conflict because the English kind of didn't have a lot of respect and thought Native Americans were savage, and the English kept taking lands which forced tribes westward. And it seems like I have to do a part 3, but I swear that part 3 will be very short. I just have to do it because I can't fit this into 15 seconds. Hope this helps. Go check that out. Should be up soon.